At 11 o'clock in the morning of a November day in 1923, a factory worker in Berlin received his weekly wages. He did not fold the money into his wallet. He handed it directly to his wife, who was waiting at the factory gate with a wheelbarrow. She ran to the baker. She did not walk. She ran. Because between the factory gate and the bakery, the money in the wheelbarrow was losing value by the hour. Before the war, a loaf of bread had cost 1 mark. By November 1923, that same loaf cost 200 billion marks. The exchange rate on November 20 stood at 4,210 billion marks to $1. The Reichsbank, Germany's central bank, was printing notes in denominations of 100 trillion marks. And still it was not enough. Germany had not been bombed. Its farms were intact, its factories still stood. The destruction was not physical, it was monetary. Between 1921 and November 1923, the papier mark lost virtually all of its purchasing power, the most consequential currency destruction in the history of the modern industrial economy. The mechanism that produced it was not mysterious, it was mathematical, predictable, and visible at every stage to anyone willing to look. The German government had made a series of decisions about how to fund a world war, about how to respond to punishing peace terms, about how to finance workers striking against a foreign army, and each decision fed the next, until the velocity of collapse outpaced the printing presses. This is the story of how a government destroyed its own currency, and why every central bank in the world today was built, in part, to make sure it never happens again. To understand what happened in 1923, you have to go back 9 years, to August 1914, when Germany entered the First World War. The government made a decision that would shape the next decade of its economic history. Rather than raise taxes to fund the war effort, it chose to borrow. The calculation was straightforward. Germany would win. The victors would impose reparations on the defeated allies, and those reparations would pay the war debt. Victory would balance the books. The calculation was wrong. By 1918, Germany had accumulated war debts of 156 billion marks. It had suspended the gold standard in 1914, severing the link between the papier mark and any fixed store of value, and it had lost. The Treaty of Versailles imposed reparations of 132 billion gold marks, payable not in the papier mark, which Germany controlled, but in gold or foreign currency, which it did not. The Weimar Republic was born into a fiscal trap. It owed debts denominated in hard currency but could only generate revenue in a soft one. Its choices were limited: raise taxes to unbearable levels, cut spending to the bone, or print more marks and hope the problem resolved itself. Between 1919 and 1921, the government managed a cautious path. The mark stabilized at around 60 to 70 marks per dollar through parts of 1920. Economists at the time believed the instability was temporary, a post-war adjustment that would correct as reparations were restructured and Germany's economy recovered. They were mistaken. In August 1921, the Reichsbank began a new policy: buying foreign currency with paper marks at any price, ostensibly to pay reparations in hard cash. The money supply expanded sharply. By December 1922, the exchange rate had fallen from 320 marks per dollar at the start of the year to 7,400. Inflation was running at nearly 700% annually. The path to hyperinflation was open. Before we go further, if this kind of history matters to you, consider subscribing to the channel. Every video here is built around the financial decisions that actually changed the world. The crises, the policy failures, the moments when the system revealed what it was designed to protect. If that is the kind of analysis you want to keep watching, the subscribe button is how you tell us. And we want to hear from you. Did you live through one of these turning points? The 2008 collapse, the 70s oil shock, the end of Bretton Woods? Did it change your family's circumstances, your understanding of how money actually works? Leave it in the comments. The most complete record of these events is not in any official report. It is in the people who were paying attention. Now, back to the account. Hyperinflation does not happen because a government runs out of money. It happens because a government decides that running out of money is not an option, and so it prints more and more and more until the currency itself becomes the problem. The mechanism is self-reinforcing. When a government prints money to cover a deficit, prices rise. Rising prices reduce the real value of the taxes it collects, because by the time the tax revenue arrives, The marks it represents are worth less than they were when the obligation was assessed. To cover the gap, the government prints more, which raises prices further, which erodes the tax base further. The spiral is mathematical and, once established, nearly impossible to stop without a complete break from the old currency. In Germany, by mid-1923, the government had outsourced money printing to 133 private companies. The Reichsbank's discount rate reached 90% by late 1923, a number that would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier. The money supply expanded from 115 billion marks in January 1923 to over 400 trillion marks by November. That is an increase of more than 3 million times in less than a year. Workers began demanding daily pay, then twice daily pay. University professor Melchior Palli watched his monthly salary rise from 10,000 marks to 10 million marks paid twice daily over less than 2 years, and still the real purchasing power fell. By October 1923, the monthly inflation rate reached 29,500%. Prices were doubling every 3.7 days. Betty Skolem, a Berlin resident, wrote to her son on October 15, 1923, "Conditions have taken a catastrophic turn here. This letter cost 15 million marks to send. It will be 30 million beginning the day after tomorrow." The mark had become a unit of time rather than a unit of value. Its worth was measured not in what it could buy, but in how quickly it needed to be spent. The hyperinflation had been building for 2 years when the event that turned gradual collapse into catastrophic freefall arrived on January 11, 1923. Germany had defaulted on its reparations obligations, not on cash payments but on coal deliveries. After the 34th default in 36 months, France and Belgium sent troops into the Ruhr Valley, the industrial heartland of Germany, to extract resources directly. The Ruhr produced 80% of Germany's coal and 70% of its steel. Without it, the German economy could not function. The Weimar government responded with a policy called passive resistance. German workers were ordered not to cooperate with the occupying forces. 2 million workers in industry, transportation, and administration went on strike, and the government paid them to do so, funding the strike through unlimited deficit spending, which meant printing marks. Coal production in the Ruhr collapsed. Factories dependent on Ruhr coal shut down across Germany. The government's fiscal position, already untenable, became catastrophic. Between January and November 1923, the mark fell from 17,000 per dollar to 4.2 trillion. In less than 11 months, the currency lost the last residual fraction of its value. The passive resistance policy was abandoned in September 1923, when the new chancellor, Gustav Stresemann, recognized that the government could not fund it and the economy simultaneously. But the damage had been done. The printing presses had been running at full capacity for 9 months, on top of the 2 years of inflation that had preceded them. By the time the resistance ended, the currency had none. On November 8 and 9, 1923, at the absolute peak of the hyperinflation crisis, a veteran named Adolf Hitler and a group of ultranationalist officers attempted a coup in a Munich beer hall. The beer hall putsch failed. Hitler was arrested and imprisoned. But the conditions that produced it, the destroyed savings of the middle class, the humiliation of foreign occupation, the complete loss of faith in the institutions of the Republic, those conditions were real. They had been created in significant part by the collapse of the mark. The economists debate the causes. What the historical record documents with precision is what it did to people. The most devastating effect of the 1923 hyperinflation was not the chaos of wheelbarrows and trillion-mark banknotes. It was the complete inversion of the social order. Hyperinflation is not a disaster that falls equally on everyone. It falls hardest on those who saved, people with mortgages, those who had borrowed marks before the inflation, watched their debts evaporate. A farmer who had borrowed to purchase land in 1920 could repay the entire mortgage in 1923 with what amounted to a few cents in real terms. Debtors became wealthy. The act of borrowing, which had been considered imprudent, was retroactively transformed into an act of genius. The people who were destroyed were those who had done everything right. Civil servants who had saved in government bonds lost everything. Life insurance policies with nominal payouts became worthless. A generation of doctors, lawyers, teachers, and professors, the professional middle class that had formed the social backbone of German society, was reduced to near poverty. Their savings, the accumulated product of decades of disciplined work, were eliminated in months. One documented case: a man who had purchased a life insurance policy in 1903 and paid premiums for 20 years, received the payout in 1923. It was enough to buy one subway ticket. Historian Ryman Pretzel, writing under the pen name Sebastian Hafner, captured the psychological destruction precisely. The mothers of Berlin, he wrote, faced a frantic race against hourly devaluation. Their work of feeding and clothing their families had become a form of financial arbitrage against a currency in free fall. The act of household management had become the act of speculating against the state. Black markets for food and everyday goods emerged across Germany's major cities. By fall 1923, as starvation loomed in urban areas, there were severe outbreaks of tuberculosis and elevated infant mortality from malnutrition. The supply of basic goods could no longer be guaranteed. This is what the historical record shows. Not hyperinflation as an abstract monetary event, hyperinflation as the systematic destruction of the social contract, the invisible agreement between a state and its citizens that the money they earn and save will retain enough value to build a life on. On November 12, 1923, 3 days before the announcement of the new currency, a banker named Hjalmar Schacht was appointed Currency Commissioner of Germany. The appointment was made at the absolute peak of the crisis. The exchange rate was 4 trillion marks per dollar and climbing. Schacht's first act was decisive and immediate. He prohibited the Reichsbank from discounting any further government treasury bills. In a single administrative order, he severed the mechanism that had been pumping new marks into the German economy. The printing presses did not stop overnight, but the direct pipeline from the government deficit to the money supply was closed. On November 15, 1923, the Rentenmark was introduced. 1 Rentenmark was exchangeable for 1 trillion papier marks. The new currency was nominally backed by mortgage bonds on German agricultural and industrial land, a fixed asset base that the government could not print. Schacht later admitted, with characteristic candor, that the backing was largely a confidence trick. Germany did not have sufficient gold reserves to underpin a hard currency. The Rentenbank, the institution issuing the new currency, was, in his own words, a fiction. But the fiction worked. The issuance was capped at 2.4 billion Rentenmarks. The government was prohibited from using it to cover deficits. The new currency's supply was fixed, prices stabilized within days, not weeks, days. By early 1924, $1 was worth 4.2 Rentenmarks, exactly the same as the pre-war parity of the old gold mark. The exchange rate had returned to the pre-1914 level. The currency that had taken 9 years to destroy had been stabilized in a matter of weeks. The lesson Schacht demonstrated was not that Germany had a secret reserve of credibility. It was that hyperinflation ends the moment a government makes a credible commitment to stop expanding the money supply. The commitment does not require gold. It does not require full reserves. It requires only that the mechanism of unlimited money creation be permanently closed, and that the public believes it is closed. The German hyperinflation of 1923 ended in weeks once the printing mechanism was closed. But its consequences lasted a century. The political consequences are documented in every history book. Hitler's first attempt at power, the Beer Hall Putsch of November 1923, failed. But the conditions that made that attempt possible did not disappear. They persisted through the relative stability of the mid-1920s, and erupted again when the Great Depression arrived in 1929, destroying what remained of the Weimar Republic's credibility. The hyperinflation of 1923 and the depression of the early 1930s form a continuous chain. The link between them was the German middle class, its savings destroyed in 1923, its employment destroyed in 1933. A class that moved, in a decade, from being the foundation of a democratic republic to being the electoral base of a totalitarian one. The institutional consequences are equally profound. The Bundesbank, Germany's post-war central bank, was designed explicitly around the trauma of 1923. Its mandate was price stability, not growth, not employment, not political convenience. Price stability. This mandate was considered so fundamental that when Germany entered the European Monetary Union, it transferred the same requirement to the European Central Bank. The ECB's obsession with inflation control is, in direct institutional terms, a century-old response to a wheelbarrow of marks that could not buy bread. The monetary lesson of 1923 is precise and documented. Currency collapse requires 3 conditions. First, a government that cannot cover its obligations through taxation or borrowing. Second, a central bank with no constraint on money creation. Third, a public that loses confidence that the currency will retain value. All 3 are necessary. The removal of any one of them stops the spiral. Schacht removed the second. He closed the pipeline. And in days, the spiral stopped. The question that 1923 poses to every monetary system since is the same question. It is not rhetorical, it is practical. Who controls the printing press, and what prevents them from using it when the pressure to do so becomes politically unbearable? Every answer to that question, the Federal Reserve's independence, the ECB's price stability mandate, the gold standard, the Bretton Woods system, is an attempt to answer the lesson of 1923. None of them is permanent. All of them are contingent on the political will to maintain them. The factory worker in Berlin ran to the baker with a wheelbarrow because the people who controlled the printing press had decided that political convenience was worth more than monetary stability. The decision was not made by a villain. It was made, at each step, by officials who believed the next decision would be the last one necessary. It always is. If this account has given you a clearer understanding of how financial power actually operates, subscribe to the channel. There are more crises, more decisions, more turning points still to document. And if this period of history connects to something you lived through or something a family member witnessed, the bank runs, the inflation, the austerity, the moment a system everyone trusted stopped working, tell us in the comments. What did they see? What did it cost them? What did they believe afterwards? The official version of these events is always written by the institutions that survived them. The fuller version belongs to the people who did not.